Hello, welcome to another weekly update. And we're going to kick off the weekly update this week by talking about development with Microsoft Teams, because I have just kicked off a kind of series of blog posts about doing development with Microsoft Teams. And the first couple of blog posts I put out this week were a bit of a primer, a bit of a warm up to some of the meat, if you like. The first one was, I've called it a preface. It's a bit of it's a kind of non-technical brain dump, if you like. It's a little bit wordy, but it's really thinking about where Teams fits and why Teams is a little bit different to some of the other things that have come before it. And I think is a little bit different to how some people are thinking about it and talking about it. Because Teams is often pitched as, it's another communication product, it's another collaboration product. I think it's a bit more than just a product, actually. And I kind of talk about that in the blog post a little bit, but it's it's more of it's kind of a tool for bringing together lots of different information and talking about it. It's kind of the central part, if you like, of everything that you're doing within Office 365. So all your Office 365 workloads, your Office, your Word, your Excel, your spreadsheets, all that information all comes together and sits inside Teams, and you talk about it as a team with other people that care about that stuff and that you need to work with to get stuff done. You do all that inside Teams. And it's, yes, Teams is what enables that communication to happen. And there's communication features in Teams, but the communication of it, that's not a product. Like, communication isn't a product. Communication is a feature, right? And that's where Microsoft are pitching Teams, right? So communication isn't an icon on your desktop. It's just part of what you do it's part of the products you use every day. And I think that's where Teams is that's where Teams is different, I think. So Teams becomes like the center of your world, and all your information kind of flows through Teams, and that's where you'll get your communication, and that's where you collaborate and work on stuff together to get it done. Now, this is kind of reminds me of something else. It reminds me of something similar that happened, and I was too young at the time to kind of appreciate it and to know about it. I wasn't working in this space at the time. But if you go back to the 1990s and think about that world, that was that was Microsoft's heyday. It was the Microsoft era of a PC on every desk, and alongside a PC on every desk, you'd have a phone. Those old school white PBX phones, right? And people would be working at their computer, and then the phone would ring, and they would stop working at their computer, and they would turn and pick up the phone, and they would have a phone call, put it down, go back to the computer. And Microsoft were trying to work out how to bridge those two worlds. And that fundamental bridging together of phone and PC is where Microsoft went down. It's what led eventually to Microsoft Lync and Skype for Business. And what's interesting now today is that we have those tools, and there's still a disconnect between the work we do and then using those tools to communicate. So we might be working, and then somebody calls us or IMs us now, and we stop working, and we're not swiveling all the way over to the phone, but we're kind of swiveling inside our computers and inside our brains. We're minimize all the work because there's an instant message. I need to go to that application, bring the instant message up, and have the instant message conversation. And so there's still a disconnect in our brains, if you like, between working and talking. And that, I think, is where Teams comes in again, because again, Microsoft are now trying to knit those worlds together even closer, so that communication is just like it's a feature of software. It's not an application. It's just something that software does. And the reason I think that's exciting for developers is that if Microsoft want to make communication just a feature of software, then they need to give developers tools and tooling to enable them to put those communication features inside their own applications, because Microsoft get that the world of applications is bigger than just Microsoft apps. There's third-party applications everywhere. There's line of business applications, specific applications for different workloads and different organizations and different people. Loads and loads of third-party specific, company-specific, workload-specific applications. Microsoft are never going to be able to cover all that field. That's where developers come in. And so Microsoft get that if they want to add these communication features into all software, they need to make some pretty good tooling to enable developers to do that. And I think that's where things are going. I think that's Microsoft's strategy, although I don't know that it is. No one's told me that it is. I think that's what it is. And part of the kind of evidence, if you like, that I would point to for that is just look at how many development options there are for Teams. So Teams as a product has been generally available for less than 12 months. It's brand new. But already there's loads of stuff you can do as a developer in Teams. And interestingly, just look at what those look at what that tooling enables you to do. It's all about bringing information into Teams or allowing you to take that kind of Teams functionality and use it in other places and use it. It's all about making Teams that center, bringing in extra information, but then also allowing users to interact with that information in new and interesting ways. So look at like bots, for instance, is a great example of that. Now, this is really good news for developers. It might be a little surprising, it might be a little scary, because the pace of change is happening really quickly. And if you have just got your head around Skype for Business development, then this is all kind of new, because all this kind of Teams-based development is built on kind of new principles of HTTP, RESTful, stateless APIs, JSON everywhere, JavaScript everywhere. So in some respects, there's a new set of things to learn. But actually, if you're a developer, you probably know these things already, because these are all industry standard things. So this is good. This is Microsoft going on the established paths and not making their own crazy thing as they may have done in the past. This is really good. You don't need to, the flip side of this is actually you don't need to understand complicated communication things to get started doing development in Microsoft Teams. You just need a basic understanding of how Teams works and a basic understanding of general development and general kind of modern development practices and skills, and you'll be absolutely fine. And I think that's really cool, because it's going to open up Teams development to loads and loads of different people. So I'm super excited about that. So anyway, that's a blog post I did about why I'm excited about Teams development. And I followed it up pretty quickly with a kind of another sort of entry level, just getting started blog post. And it's all about applications and manifests. So applications are the kind of delivery mechanism, if you like, for Microsoft Teams development. So anything you do in Microsoft Teams, you wrap it inside an application. And it's those applications that users choose or having sort of loaded on for them. It's those applications that administrators can control and block and allow. And within each application, there's a sort of common way to configure and set up an application, and that's done using a manifest file, which is all in JSON. So in the blog post, I go through that manifest file. I talk about the things that you have to have in there, the required things, and then some of the optional things. Basically, there's a bunch of required stuff. And then for each different type of development you're doing, there's one or more optional sections that you add on for that type of application. So I talk about that in that blog post. That's worth a read. If you're going to get into Teams development, it's definitely worth understanding this construct of an application and of a manifest file and where you need to register it and all that sort of stuff. So have a look at that. That's worth looking at as well. All right, let's step away from Teams for a bit because I've talked about it for 10 minutes. So let's talk about something else, completely separate from communications, but I think it's cool and interesting. And that is a new Azure service called Event Grid, Azure Event Grid. It's all about event-driven development. So there's lots of applications now where the applications are responding to events. So loads of stuff happening in IoT, and it's, you know, that's where I see it being driven from, is IoT thing. But that's kind of, I've got an interest in looking at IoT and stuff, so I kind of noticed it there. But I think other things as well, you know, initiating business processes in response to things happening on systems, in response to users kicking off processes and things like that. And it feeds into this kind of serverless compute, feeds into all the stuff that's been going on with logic apps and workflow orchestration and stuff like that. So new service on Azure called Event Grid. Okay. There's a whole blog post about it, so I'm not going to go into it, mostly because I don't know enough about it to speak in any kind of terms of authority about it. I'm going to read out from the webpage that it is a fully managed event routing service and the first of its kind. So that sounds pretty exciting. If it's as good as what I think it's going to be, then it's going to make building these serverless IoT reactionary processes much easier. It will mean less polling. It will mean less building APIs just to join APIs together. So I'm kind of excited about that. I think it should be really good. And again, it shows Azure for me is kind of way out in front in terms of cloud services and PaaS services. So I think that's yeah, that's really exciting. And then something that's not technical but is interesting and is all about bots. So I'm talking about it, I'm going to include it. And that's a really cool infographic that has been done by Hacker Life, that I'll put a link to in the show notes. And it's all about so the title is, why is everyone so excited about bots? And that's a question I get quite a lot, actually, because people, and not just technical people, real people, like people out in the world that I kind of meet and talk to, and my friends and stuff, they're getting that bots are a thing. Like they're hearing that bots are a thing, and they want to know, you know, what's the deal? What's going on with bots? Why are they such a big deal now? What are they? What does it mean for us? So there's a cool infographic that talks about what bots are, why all the big fuss about them, and then some really interesting stats as well. Sort of some of the stuff I've already spoken about previously, and I've talked about around how apps are now kind of dying and dead, and how bots are the new apps, and some of the stats behind that, which is interesting, and how and how people are using more and more messaging apps and stuff to communicate, and so what that kind of means, and what that means for, you know, people offering products and offering services, and how they're going to pivot to doing that in a more chat-based way, and that's where bots come in. So yeah, it's a good infographic, some really good stats in there to take, maybe keep, you know, in your back pocket for when people ask you about, you know, bots and why bots are so important and a thing and stuff like that. All right, so that's pretty much me for this week. I am super excited about next week because I'm pretty sure I know what blog post I'm going to put out next week, which is a rare state of preparedness for me. So, but it's going to be a really good one. It's going to be some Skype for Business Development that I think is pretty cool. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, look out for that. And meanwhile, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you again next week.